Good morning and welcome. My name is Ma Devi, Reverend Mary Frances Drake. I am a priest and bishop in an independent sacramental tradition, Christian mysticism. And I'm here today on December 3rd, 2023, the beginning of the Advent season, to talk to you about mysticism in the modern world. And I thought I'd just chat for a little bit and give you some background about who I am and where I've been and come from, and then also what mysticism is about in history and for us today. So let me give you a definition of mysticism first. The belief that union with or absorption into the deity or the divine or the absolute or the spiritual apprehension of knowledge inaccessible to the intellect may be attained through contemplation and self-surrender. So that's a definition that one might go by for mysticism, the belief. And I would say something more than belief, because mysticism or Gnosticism is all about knowing. It's about having personal experience of the divine. In the outer world, I have this beautiful picture image of wintertime. I actually live in southern Vermont, where winters look very much like this, although not yet this year. And today I'm coming to you from Houston, Texas, where I am attending a rugby game that my daughter's playing today. So as mystics, what one could define themselves as a mystic if you've had experiences of oneness with nature, oneness with life, oneness with the divine nature that is inside of you, or what some people call God, or the divinity, or the deity, or the absolute. And oftentimes we have experiences in life. So along with being a priest and bishop, I am a psychologist. So in the psychology world, we call them peak experiences, where we have experiences that are so profoundly deep that we just know that we're more than just our body, that there's more to life than just what our culture is showing us. Work, eat, sleep, consume, repeat, that kind of thing. Maybe distract, maybe we'll put distract in there as well. So mysticism is a practice, a spiritual technology where we tune in ever more deeply to those experiences that we kind of have randomly and intermittently in life, those peak experiences that remind us there's something more to life than what we've been told. So for myself, I've spent many decades looking for that light, or I did spend many decades looking for that light and searching through the religious traditions of the world. And what you can find is that beyond the institutional religions of the world, where things can get dogmatic and rule-bound, and in some cases shaming, beyond that is the spirit of those traditions that is mysticism. And mysticism is a technique, a way of uniting your spirit with the divine. First of all, coming to know yourself as spirit, and then uniting your spirit with the divine, or with the oneness of nature, or the oneness of creation, both physically in the external world and spiritually. So often people have mystical experiences when they are in nature, like in this beautiful scene behind me. If you were standing on this mountain, you might feel a sense of awe and wonder. You might feel your heart open and feel like I'm part of something much greater than myself. Sometimes that happens in moments of crisis. For example, if someone has an experience where they think they might die, they might have flashes of their life before their eyes. They might come to know things that they didn't know before. Sometimes people have near-death experiences where that happens, where they almost die or they die and come back, and then they see a great light and feel a great peace. And then when they come back to the physical world, they're changed by that. So life has a way of making us mystics, or affirming, confirming our mystical nature as beings, as spiritual beings in a physical world, even while our cultures are much more focused on the material, the mental, and somewhat the emotional aspects of being in a body. So all throughout time, all throughout human history, there have been practices and teachings that help us to purposefully move into an inner relationship and experience of the divine, mystical experiences. So sometimes we can have those experiences in churches or in nature or in peak moments of our lives, like when someone is being born or someone is dying, or we're having a profound revelation in our mind that says there's got to be more than what they're telling me. I know I had those revelations in my 20s where I tried to do everything that I was told would make my life fulfilling and happy. I went to college, found work, got married, had children, all those things, bought a house, bought a car, thought that was the way to happiness. And what I found instead was that all of those things were happy for a short time, but they didn't sustain the inner feeling of connection that I somehow was seeking. Something in me was not satisfied. And as a therapist, that seems to be the case. Many people come to therapy because they feel discontent. This kind of vague discontent, like, why don't I feel happy? By all external proof, I should be happy. And when I realized that it didn't matter how much I accumulated or how much I accomplished in the world, I was still going to have that hole in my heart that was saying, why don't I feel happy? And that hole turned out to be a God-sized hole, a divine hole that was calling to me even as I was seeking it. And eventually, through my deep practice as a Christian mystic, I found my way to the inner divine and to union with the inner divine over time. First there are glimpses, then there's more and more consistency, and then there's consistent experience of knowing yourself as part of the one God. Or as my teacher used to say, that we are all cells in the mind of God. So how does that work? It used to be that the esoteric schools or the mystical schools were kind of underground because the institutions of religion in the world had a lot to do with power, as they still do today, and oftentimes with money associated with that power. And so the traditions that gave people their own experience of God, instead of putting someone like a priest or a imam or someone in between you and God, mysticism is about coming into direct experience of God. Now, sometimes we need leaders and teachers and priests to help us get there, but often in the religious institutions, what happens is they keep the masses down by saying you're unworthy, you're a sinner, or you don't have the right to have that experience. There's got to be someone between you and that experience. So in the esoteric and mystical schools, what they did was taught people how to have that experience, how to cultivate a relationship within their own being with the creator, all of creation, intelligent design, whatever you want to call it, the energy of the universe. I happen to be a Christian mystic because the way that I followed into that union with God or the divine is the way of Jesus and Mary. Now, there's a lot of Christians in the world who I say give Christ a bad name, which means to me that they don't act as Jesus acted. They don't imitate the Christ. They use the ideas of Christianity to divide and shame or judge other people, all things that Jesus was very much against. So we have to separate the institution from the essence, or as Jesus would say, the spirit from the law. The law is the rigid institution and what those institutions said about how to have an experience of God, and the spirit is the things that Jesus said, like, my Father and I are one. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Know you not that you are God's. If your eye is single, your whole body will be filled with light. So those are very high esoteric mystical statements that reflect Jesus's experience of being one with creation, with the Creator, with what in his time was called the Father, and what we in our mystical Christian tradition today call the Father Mother. So not to leave out any aspect of God. Humans tend to do a thing called anthropomorphizing, which means we put an image onto God that looks like us. Or looks like the ruling class. God looks like the ruling class. I can't remember who said that, but basically looks like an old white man in our culture. In other cultures, God and Jesus can look different. So we know that that's a construction of our mind. But the mind is not the ruler of our being. And the emotions are not the ruler of our being. And our body is not the ruler of our being. The spirit is the part of us that is the internal experience. Now, in our world, we're encouraged to indulge in things of the body, of the emotions, and of the mind. And many people believe that the intellect is the highest experience that we have, or the highest of our faculties, or our intelligences. So just so you know, I did that route. I have 2 master's degrees, one in psychology and one in social work, and I also am studying right now for a doctor of ministry. So I went that way and I did that, just so you know. Not to say there aren't good things about study and about learning things, about knowing how to think well, and how to function in the world and all that, all good stuff. But it doesn't lead you to an experience of yourself as more than a mental, emotional, and physical being. Most often it leads you to those kind of dead ends and a lot of questions. I happen to work in academia. I teach for the University of Massachusetts in their psychology and sociology departments, and I've taught at other schools. And most of the mainstream academic education is feeding the intellect, or feeding the mind, as the highest aspect of ourselves. So in my studies, I went into psychology because I knew I had had experiences in my life that I needed to figure out, and I needed to figure out why people did what they did. I was very confused about the world, how so many people in the world could say that they were religious and loved God and followed God, and then they could do horrible things, of course, as is still happening in the world today. And so I studied psychology to figure people and myself out. And then I found that there was kind of a dead end, because psychology could tell you what was wrong with you, but not really how to heal it, unless you wanted to take medication or, have some procedure that tried to get you to not feel or think that way. So I continued on, and my studies brought me to the spiritual and philosophical teachings of the world. And I started looking around and seeing that every major religious tradition had this underlying current of mysticism, of inner journey. In Islam, it's called Sufism. So Sufis are the mystics of Islam. In the Judaic tradition, in the Jewish tradition, they're called Kabbalists. In the Hindu tradition, they're contemplative yogis. And in Christianity, we're just called Christian mystics, followers of the mystical Christ. So in studying that, what I found was that all of those traditions have spiritual technologies that lead us into a relationship with the inner divine. So I want to talk about those for a moment. So in the Hindu tradition, the word yoga means union. And so there are practices that lead us into union with the divine. And there are 5 categories of practices which are in every mystical tradition, every religious tradition. So those are devotion, which is called bhakti in the Hindu tradition, study or gnana, prayer and chanting is japji, postures and mudras is called asanas, and then service is karma. And when we do all 5 of those, that's called Raja Yoga, or the royal road to God. So those things are practices that one can do. Prayer, meditation, contemplation, study of sacred texts, using postures, either physical postures, hand postures called mudras and mantras. We can do postures that have energy associated with them. And then we can be in service. We can give to our fellow human beings through prayer, through action, through kindness. Excuse me. So those are the ways that we get to this relationship. Now, to begin with, we have to have at least a hope or a desire to know if this relationship is actually real and if it's possible for us humans in today's world. In the old world, there were, in the Christian mystical tradition, Cathars and Knights Templar and Rosicrucians who were persecuted by the Catholic Church during the Inquisition for using these skills and these technologies to have an inner relationship with the divine, an experience of the expanded nature of our being. And they were killed for having such things. In today's world, I don't know if it just doesn't hit the radar the same way, because there's so much going on in the world and so many things in competition for airtime. But mysticism in today's world is very similar. There are ways of having this relationship techniques or technologies. The yogic technologies are being studied and shown in, the world of science, being convincing those scientists who are skeptical that these things actually have an impact on the brain, on the body, on the energy centers of the body, on the health of the body. And so we're starting to prove that these ancient practices are actually effective and efficient in awakening a state of being that is different from our average state of being. So we know that there are different states of being. We call them alpha, beta, delta, theta, brain waves. We know that our bodies are bioelectrical beings, that we run off of light. There's the source of our light right there, the sun. And that we can change the energy of our being and the physiology of our being and our brain waves and the way our being, our hearts, and the intelligence in our body expresses itself. In the Hindu tradition, they say head, heart, and hara. Hara is like the gut. And many people are familiar with the feeling in their gut that tells them things, or intuition. Intuition means knowing from within. So mysticism takes that intuition and studies it and practices it until it becomes a relationship with the inner divine and your being in the physical form. So then there's you as the divine and you as the incarnate person with your life, personality, wounding, experiences, etc. So bringing that forward over time, what happened is that there became the churches started to have, or the religions had some kind of competition. They were at war with each other, as we're seeing, all over the world, right? Religious war, philosophical war, war for resources, etc. And those who were mystics were going underground and away, hiding away, doing these practices in order to have a higher experience of being alive, of an incarnate spirit, a spirit in the physical world, as Sting sings about spirits in the material world. So when we do these practices of diving deeply into the inner experience through meditation, through prayer, through postures, through these yogas or technologies for uniting with God, in the Christian tradition, we have sacraments and initiations and prayers and things that are done in order to stimulate and cultivate that relationship, that knowing, that gnosis, that inner knowing, like my Father and I are one, God and I are one, the Spirit of heaven is within me. And then that can come forth into our life, and then we're looking at the world from a very different perspective, saying that every human being has that in them. And we are hopeful and working toward helping people to understand that and be free from the tethers of our experience as simply physical, mental, and emotional beings, and have this oversight of the spirit, or this kind of an inner objective witness that watches the being that we have. In psychology, we would call that metacognition, like a higher knowing, watching our body, our mind, and our emotions, and regulating them, correcting them if they are out of line with how we want to live or out of line with what we know our highest truth is. And so those practices require that we have some singleness of purpose or focus, that we dive deeply into one lineage or another. And there are many paths to God. It doesn't really matter which one you do. But if you go into those practices, you need to go deeply into them. There are a lot of people in today's world who are taking a bunch of, digging shallow wells in different practices. And although those will bring inspiration and those will bring help to your life, it's the deep dive or the deep well into a tradition that brings you the transformative process that not only gives you experiences, but convinces and transforms your being. So you become a transcendent being, means transcending the physical, the emotional, and the mental world, so that you know yourself as something greater than that. And that's what a mystic is. So you can be a baby mystic, which is someone who's having these experiences either randomly or haphazardly, or just because that's the way the universe works, that we evolve to greater and greater knowing of ourselves. Or you can become a purposeful mystic, which is doing the practices, choosing to spend your time, energy, and attention doing practices that develop those experiences. And sometimes we have teachers and helpers along the way who help us, direct us to what should I study, what does a devotional life look like, what are the sacraments or postures or prayers that I might do that would enhance that experience. And eventually what happens is you start to live in the flow of love that is life. You start to live in a flow that feels blessed, that feels divinely inspired. And then when you're living in that flow, time and space dissipate in their density. So you become aware of the eternal now. So living in the eternal now means your mind is not going to the past to suffer for what was, not going into the future for desiring what will be, but staying in the present and seeing how the Spirit unfolds in front of you and around you, and how the Spirit moves through you, and how you become an instrument of the Spirit rather than like a pinball in a machine just bouncing all over the place from whatever external stimuli distract you in body, mind, or emotions. So if you've had experiences of being dragged from pillar to post, either through physically, mentally, emotionally, and you're tired of that, you could decide to choose a tradition and study it and practice the practices of that tradition so that you can have those experiences. Now, I would assume that you've had some of those experiences, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this talk. And so in that, you can look to those experiences and have that be the foundation of your, let's say, faith. So we start out with a hope that it's true, that we could have a life of internal liberation. And then we do practices so that it starts to prove itself to us, and then we start to have faith. Eventually, out of faith comes knowing, or gnosis. Gnosis is a fancy word for knowing things from the inside. Now, once you have an experience from the inside, there's nobody that can take that away from you. People might doubt it, they might make fun of it, they might dismiss it, they might dismiss you. But if your being has had an experience in a mystical sense, there's nothing anyone can do to take that away from you. It's a profound experience that is imprinted on your soul. And only if you believe that it didn't happen or you question it, then you can take away the essential nature of that experience and kind of erase it from your being. You can say, oh, that didn't really happen, that was my imagination, or I can't really explain that in a way that other people can validate it or make it sound credible, and so then therefore it didn't happen. But if you read the lives of mystic saints of all time, of all traditions, you will find that they too had those experiences. So there's plenty of works out there. Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi comes to mind, or Siddhartha about the Buddha, or books about the lives of the saints like St. Francis or St. Teresa of Avila. Lots and lots of Catholic saints that have written profound works about mysticism and mystical experience. So the practices or disciplines, what's required is our attention. We have to have intention to know, desire to know, and attention on those things long enough for them to take hold. So I encourage you to be willing to do the experiment of mysticism, which is do some things, choose a tradition, read the wisdom literature of that tradition, do some things that are practiced in that tradition, and give yourself an assignment to experiment and see what happens when you practice the mystical arts that cultivate this inner knowing and inner transformation. And if you need help with that, I'm one of the helpers, and there are lots of other helpers out there who would help you to dive further and further into that, depending on the desire of your being and your spirit, how far you want to go into that experience. Now, when I started out as a student, I studied all different traditions. I studied with a Buddhist monk, I studied with Sikh yogis, I studied with Native Americans and Wiccans, I studied with Mormons. I did a lot of things, searching, until my heart rested when I found Christian mysticism, which is a path that led me into the heart of the divine in my own being and brought liberation to my spirit and my mind and peace to me. And those are the fruits of the Spirit: love, peace, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Those are the fruits of the Spirit, which means that they're what comes forth when you do these practices. Those are the natural aspects of our being that come forth when we practice the mystical arts in our lives. So I think that's enough talking for me. So I'm going to go back to the group, and if anyone has questions or comments, I'm happy to elucidate these things further. It's a very brief overview, but you can find lots of information about mysticism online, and lots of teachings and practices support, I'm sure not far from you, or online, which is what our spiritual community does. Our community is called Sacred Balance, and we offer sacraments and other supportive teachings in an online community. So I'll welcome you back now. I'm going to put you on view. If you don't want to be in the recording, you can just leave your camera off. And everyone is on mute, so if you have a question or a comment, you're welcome to take yourself off mute and let me know your thoughts or questions. We have about 20 minutes or something like that. And if there are no questions, I'm sure I can think of something else to say. So one of the challenges of mysticism is that it's a word that people don't really know. And so because they don't know it, there tends to be a lot of assumptions made about what it means, or what it has to do with religion, why it has anything to do with religion at all. And I just wanted to say that the word religion comes from the root word, I think it's religare, which means to bind or reconnect. So it means to reconnect you. The word religion is supposed to mean to reconnect you to the spirit or to God. And unfortunately, in the institutions of religion, that hasn't happened. And so many, many people are turning away from religion because of that, from organized religion because of that. So Eden is saying, can you share more about energetic postures? So yes, I can. So if you're familiar with David Hawkins, who our Mother Beatrice here introduced our community to a few years ago, then you will be familiar with the calibration of energy. So there are certain teachings, teachers, practices that calibrate at a very high energy. And that high energy, when we practice those things, it's kind of like a tuning fork. It increases the energy in our own body, in our own being. So postures are some of those things. Now in the Christian tradition, you might see people kneeling. That's a posture. In the yogic tradition, they're called asanas. So you might see someone kneeling up with their arms up. This posture is a posture of openness. It's like making a chalice of yourself to receive a blessing coming down into you. Of course, the crown of the head is our spiritual connection. We're plugged into the spirit through there, and also through our heart, which is at the center of our outstretched arms, the center of Jesus' outstretched arms, the heart. So the heart and the crown help us to, in love, commune with the divine, and through our crown, offer up, open up to higher influences. Sometimes we see people in what in yoga is called the child pose, where they kneel and then go forward with their head toward the ground. That particular posture is to get your head below your heart. So the intellect takes the back seat to the heart. So if you put your head down on the ground, you're saying, I'm bowing, submitting my head to the spirit of love. So that's what that's about. You see people doing the genuflection. That's a mudra. Genuflection is welcoming the spirit into form. And these points on the shoulders, these are chakras or energy points. The points on the shoulders are the points of protection and connection. So you say in the name of the creator, the mediators. So through God, for us, the mediators would be Jesus and Mary, or any teacher that helps you get to God. And the Holy Spirit, so here's the Holy Spirit that says, I've got you, like someone wrapping something around you. I've got you here. And also letting the heart be the center of our being. So that cross is spirit in matter. And the Rosicrucians have the center of their cross as a rose. So the blossoming heart is the key to, the key to devotion, which means falling in love with the divine through the experience of the spirit, which opens your heart. Sometimes you might see in movies like the movie about Mother Teresa, where she's prostrating herself, lying down flat in front of the altar with the arms out, face down. That's another level of devotion. Prostration means I surrender. I surrender my whole being to you. And as the definition of mysticism said, the surrender was part of that. Hold on, let me get that back here. So, knowledge inaccessible to the intellect may be attained through contemplation and self surrender. So, the prostration is a way of surrendering the ego self over to the spiritual self or the divine self. What else do we do? So you see the priests do a lot of things like this sign. You know, there's mudras. This one like this is a mudra of the Christ, and so that's a mudra that replicates the energy of the Christ. This is the heart finger, the ring finger is the heart finger, represents the energy of the Christ in your being. Sometimes we're doing this one, which is the blessing mudra. You know, both two fingers up. You'll see a lot of images of Jesus and Mary with their hands like that. So in other traditions, you see lots of them. You know, someone's coming in here. In Islam, of course, people are praying and kneeling and bowing many times a day, right? They have 5 times a day when they're doing those prayers. In Christianity, it would be morning prayers, evening prayers, and then prayers at 3 meals a day. So that gives you 5 times to tap into to God. And so those are good, ways to separate your day. Say in the morning I pray, in the evening I pray, and then before every meal I pray. Prayers of gratitude, of course, are really connective as well. Let me think if anybody thinks of any other mudra I'm missing, you can shout it out. I'm trying to think of what else. Those are kind of the big ones in Christianity. There are lots of hand mudras, and you can find the work of David Hawkins online. You can find his books that talk about what the level of vibration is for each of those mudras, and also for particular prayers, which are another form of devotion, like the Our Father or the 23rd Psalm or the Rosary prayers, or what kind of energy those hold. So what you're doing is purposefully putting yourself in energy that increases the energy of your being and opens your mind, opens your third eye. There's a place in us called the Eye of Horus in the Egyptian tradition, and it opens your sight, your spiritual sight, to other worlds and other experiences. So those prayers help to open the third eye, open the chakras that have to do with the spirit. So the lower chakras, there's nothing wrong with them, they're not bad, but if we only function through the lower ones, then we're going to be kind of pulled around by emotions and physicality and sexuality without any inspired knowing behind it. And so as you can see in the world, that causes people a lot of trouble when they don't have the inspiration of the spirit to guide the body. The body is not bad, it's the temple of God, but if it's like an untrained puppy, it can get itself into trouble, right? It goes all by impulse, motivated by impulse. Did that answer your question, Eden? Okay. Happy to hear other people's questions or comments. Welcome, Jay. Mystic Jay. Hello. I'm Ma Devi. I know you weren't here during the introduction, but it's nice to have you here. Yes, Rosemary.
Can you speak a little bit about what's happening around us right now and grounding?
Sure. The world has been, is, and has always been a world that is led by fear, power, and let me think of a third word. Certainly power, fear, and let's say force. So if we think of ourselves only as physical beings, then we feel quite instinctually that we want to preserve ourselves and hold ourselves safe, and those we love safe. So we become self-preserving, protective, and protective of those that we consider our own. So our own family, our own tribe, our own nation, whatever it is. You see people do that. I'm here in Houston watching rugby games, and the teams are the tribe here. Like you're either a friend or a foe depending on which which side you're on, right? So people really act that out in their bodies. So we have this instinctual nature that is competitive and thinks that that we're separate and that there's a limited supply, and so you have to get what you can for your own and protect it. And that is the motivation for most people in the world: protect themselves and the ones they love physically, emotionally, and mentally, and it doesn't include everyone. So that looks like people being afraid and people out of fear acting in ways to wield power so that they can keep themselves safe. And then oftentimes that power turns into force, because if you can't convince someone to love you, care for you, share with you, protect you, then you will use force. People use force to take what they want or what they think is theirs, or thinking that their life and what they have is more important than what others have. So that's the root of all war, is this fight over who's right, or the fight over who's got stuff that somebody else wants. So resources, or the rights to property, as we see in the Middle East. Whose property is it? The rights to resources. So we know there are people in the world who are starving and people in the world who have too much. And we don't do a good job of sharing that. So until we realize that we are not separate from one another, and that this one human family really should be protecting and caring for each other, as all of the saints and mystics came to tell us, like, we can't do this, like whatever affects anyone affects all of us. So until we take that on and remember that we're not separate, then that is the way of the world, right? The Peace Pilgrim called it the jungle law of tooth and claw. So it's really our nature as kind of as beasts, and I won't say that in the same way as an animal like a wolf. A wolf does that but a wolf doesn't necessarily do that in a way like humans do, where we disregard the importance of the rest of creation, let's say. So we have that situation in the world. We see political philosophies trying to change that. Some are digging their heels in and saying this is the only way to get what we want and keep ourselves safe. Other people are saying we need to share and accept other people's ways of being. And then people fight over that. So until we recognize that we're all one species, we're all earthlings, and everybody matters, not separating ourselves by race or religion or socioeconomic class or education or a million things that we can separate and have power over someone, right? Put ourselves above them. When we do, as Jesus said, which is love one another, love God, love your neighbor as yourself, then that way of being is likely to continue and has continued throughout time. We see more of it now in today's world because we have more access to information about what's happening all over the world. So it seems like it's happening more, but tribal wars and property wars have been happening for most of humanity. It doesn't mean it's our nature. It's our lower nature. We have the opportunity to cultivate our higher nature, which would have us be helpers, I saw a meme the other day with Jimmy and Rosalind Carter putting up a wall, and they'd say, this is the kind of wall we should be focusing on. They're building a house for someone rather than building a wall to keep somebody out. So we can be helpers to that higher way, or we can be supporters of the lower way, and we have a choice in that. Now, some people believe that that's as far as it goes, is that power and force, and so that there's no space in them to have another way. But energetically speaking, we can have an impact. If you read the book The 100th Monkey, that if enough people with enough intention believe in the higher way, then that's what will come to be. And I do actually see that happening. And to speak to what you're saying about what's happening now, energetically on our planet, things are changing. And it looks like a lot more, it looks like the darkest hour before the dawn right now. But if we keep our sights on the dawn and know that this is a new era coming, a new era of higher inspiration, higher motivation, the motivation of love, the motivation of truth, the motivation of connection, the motivation of spirit, those 4 chakras, that if humanity rises up at least to love, then we will treat one another better and we'll treat the earth better, and that will be good. And that's what Jesus and Mary came to install, and actually all of the earth avatars have come to install, like helping people move toward that consciousness. So those people were mystics and prophets and seers, and they came to say, hey, we could do this differently. We don't have to continue to do it the old way just because that's the tradition, just because that's the way people have done it. There's another way we can do it. So when I say the way, capital T, capital W, there are lots of ways. Christian mysticism is one way of installing that higher knowing in your being. And there are those mystical traditions in every religious tradition that will help us do that. Even Stoicism is a very, kind of heady way of doing that, but it also works to say every person is important and that we have a higher ideal than just fulfilling our own desires. Like there's some philosophies in the world that would support that as well. Buddhism tends to be more philosophical than devotional. It's a way of being. But Jesus came to show a way, and you think about the different ways that Christianity expresses itself. Some of it is fear-based, and some of it's love-based, and some of it's service-based. So as Christian mystics in our tradition, we help people move from fear to love to service, to giving. And that's a way of transformation, and that's what we hope will happen on the whole of the earth. That's what all good people of good heart want. And if enough of us focus on that, then that's what will be. And I do believe it. I do believe that's coming. My mystical experiences tell me that that is coming, and so we can hold out hope for that, that to manifest on the earth. So, hope that answered your question, Rosemary. So it looks like Jay said, "Happy rising. Thank you for sharing your wisdom." My pleasure, Jay. Good to have you here, and feel free to ask any questions or make any comments that you like. I did study several other traditions quite deeply, and so I know that they can have a positive impact on that transformation. It just happens that I landed with Christian mysticism as my way, and I could tell I was home, and so my spirit knew that was the way for me. And I don't anticipate or expect it will be the way for everyone. And I also don't think it does any good to say one way is better than the other. That's kind of more of the same in terms of judging and separating us from one another. Yeah. Rosemary, did you have something else to say?
We talk a lot about Jesus and Mother Mary, about being mystics. Can you talk a little bit about the other mystics that were here?
Oh, there's so many. So many. I like to look at the old mystics, but I liked more than that. I like to say there are mystical, enlightened, high consciousness beings here on the planet today. You may be one of them. You may want to be one of them. You may be studying with them. You may be trying to get yourself there. But just because we look back and see the history or what people have written in history about these experiences, excuse me, I'm going to grab a lozenge. I was doing a lot of cheering yesterday at a rugby game, and so my voice is not what it should be today. So in history, St. Francis of Assisi, St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, Hildegard von Bingen. Now we're studying right now in the Advent season St. Gertrude the Great, who I don't really know about, but I will know about soon. I will know more about. So those are Christian mystics across time, many, many others. Not every Christian is a mystic, but if you look to the saints, you'll probably find the ones that were, or if you look for mystical writings. I said Paramahansa Yogananda, he's a yogi or a Hindu mystic. There are many others, the gurus of the Sikh tradition, Guru Nanak and others. You can find their writings and their prayers. Let me see, Preston says, a lot of things you've been speaking about have lots of similarities with the wave of liberation theology. Yes, I mean, I would say that all mysticism is liberation theology. It's meant to release people from suffering. Do you have any experience with studying liberation theology? What lessons can we learn from these thinkers? All right. Thanks for the question, Preston. I'm just going to finish answering Rosemary here. So the current mystics or current enlightened beings, let's say, who live on the planet, you might know from their writings, like, for example, Eckhart Tolle, an enlightened being who's sharing truth. Certainly the Dalai Lama, you know, they're kind of right out there in plain view. Desmond Tutu, you know them by their works, right? Gandhi, you know them by their works, and so when you read their works, your spirit opens and is inspired and liberated, to speak to Preston's term, liberated from the tethers of knowing ourselves only in the physical way. So the let me think of a couple of others that you might know of. There's a man named Mooji, Mooji, non-religious mystic, and many of the mystics choose not to align themselves with a particular tradition because most traditions have a lot of baggage. I personally am very dedicated to the way of Jesus and Mary, and so I call myself a Christian mystic. Other people, like Andrew Hutley said, I'm a world mystic. Okay, that's one way to say it. There is no differentiation between mystics. It's just which path you follow, and what's really important is how deeply you go into that path and how transformed you are by it. Because the process of transformation will heal your human wounds, will open your mind to a greater way of saying we're all one family, will increase the inspiration and spirit moving through you so that you awaken in your mind as a being of God. And then you'll want to, get out there and do something. Whether that's internally by prayer and contemplation or just being in that consciousness, or through doing some act of service. Many people have missions in the world. I'm just going to look up liberation theology so I can answer Preston a little bit more clearly. Definition of liberation theology. A movement in Christian theology developed mainly by Latin American Roman Catholics emphasizes liberation from social, political, and economic oppression and is an anticipation of ultimate salvation. Well, hallelujah, Jesus. I guess I'll call myself a liberation theologist. What I would say to that, of course, you look to Jesus and he said, feed the hungry, take care of the orphans and the widows, give to the poor, visit the prisoners and the sick. All the things that, will liberate the spirit. If you have ever done something kind for someone out of the kindness of your heart and had it received, you know what it feels like to change someone's reality. You know what it feels like to bring someone hope, to liberate their spirit from the suffering. Like the burden of suffering can be uplifted through kindness, through compassion, through service. Many, many ways of doing that. And of course, if we were doing that, if we were doing what Jesus said, which is to love one another, like love people like you want to be loved. The golden rule is a rule in every religious tradition. So if we were actually doing that, of course we would liberate society from economic and political and social injustice. Of course we would. But what I want to note here is that mysticism isn't about fighting injustice. It's about focusing on justice. So Mother Teresa said, I will not go to an anti-war rally, but I will go to a pro-peace rally. So we get to decide if we want to be part of the fight or we want to be part of the solution. So as mystics, we ring the gong of truth. Now, that's not to say we're not going to stand up. Jesus turned over some tables, right? Not to say we're not going to stand up in the face of injustice, not to say that we're not going to be putting ourselves in the way. All the Christian martyrs put themselves in the way of injustice, right? And so I don't know how I raised my hand right there, maybe by waving my hand, I guess it saw me. So that's where I would say there might be a difference, because a lot of people take up the cause of justice and they might do things that are unjust in the name of justice. They might do things that are not peaceful in the name of seeking peace. So that's where we have to be really careful. If there's anger in us, we have to be careful to not let that be the motivating force for our actions, even if we're doing social action. So I'm a social worker. Advocacy is a big part of my life, has been a big part of my life. Now I advocate for peace. I advocate for equality. I advocate for love. Love will take care of all those problems and liberate. But if we are working from scarcity, from separation and divisiveness, then there will be no liberation from those things, because there's always going to be someone trying to get more and someone trying to fight other people for resources or for being right. So, does that answer your question, Preston, or is there more you would like to say about that? Or anybody else? So, hello, Iris.
Hi,
How are you?
I got the wrong time.
That's all right. That's all right. We're just in the questions now, but we'll send out the video later so you can take a look at it. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Likewise.
I'm going to put you on mute because I have another question here, okay?
Okay.
Jay, did you have something you wanted to say? Oh, maybe not. I don't know if you're speaking, Jay, but I can't hear you. So I guess I would say, as a mystic, I am a proponent of, well, one of the vows of a priest or bishop is to alleviate suffering. So liberation theology is about alleviating suffering, right? Alleviating social and economic and political suffering, alleviating suffering of the heart. Many people are suffering from loneliness, from separation, and then they get depressed, or they're suffering from fear because the world is not very stable, and so it's fearful, and so then they're afraid, and then they do things out of fear that they wouldn't otherwise do if they were free to express themselves in love. So I don't know what the tactics of the liberation theology folks are, what their approach is. Man is the master of his own destiny. Faith without ideology is dead. So these are some things, 4 major themes of liberation theology. Faith without ideologies is dead. There's a saying in the Bible, faith without works is dead. And so we do have to be part of the solution, of course. But how we are part of the solution does matter. The hermeneutics of suspicion, the church, a new breed of Christians. Yeah, I would want to see the fruits of their. Labors, to see if I agreed with the fruits, like how they're acting out all of these things. Establishing ways of helping communities from suffering. This one says establishing a theology based on Marxism. So Marxism has to do with trying to make all people equal and the same in terms of how much they have and what they do with their resources. I would love for everybody to have enough. That would be great. For everybody to have, for the baseline of what people have in terms of food, shelter, clothing, community, spirituality, that everybody had as much as they needed. And if we were better sharers, then those who had a lot would be sharing more, and those who had less would have what they need. And we actually don't have to take everything away from people who have a lot. We just have to get them to share enough so everybody has what they need. Gandhi said, live simply so others may simply live. So one way that we can do that, one way that I do that, now I'm not a hugely rich person, but I live pretty simply, and I use my resources to do things that are in support of liberating others from suffering. That might be donating or volunteering or, buying a hungry person on the street some lunch. Depends on the day. And we can all do that. We can all find ways to actively work our mysticism into the world to make the world a better place. But if we're doing that in a way that is revolutionary, so this is established violent revolutionary movements, no, I can't get on board with that. So I'm just looking at something I found online about liberation theology, so this could be really biased, but I wouldn't get on board with a violent revolution. It doesn't work. It's never worked. It's never worked to hate. It's never worked to do harm. So one of the, Jesus was a martyr, Christian martyr, right? Many saints died for the cause of love and refused to become violent. Gandhi, Martin Luther King, like many people that we look up to around the world chose not to hate. Now, as a ordained priest and bishop, I have vowed not to hate. I cannot hate. It doesn't mean I don't get angry about the things people do. Don't get me wrong. There's righteous anger for inequality, oppression, divisiveness, war. Our human hearts move to anger because otherwise we might move to despair. And despair is a black hole where we won't have any spirit left to be of help. So we can't let ourselves hate and fall into despair. And it's hard. It's hard not to fall into those things. If you look around the world, it's hard not to be mad at somebody. And it's hard not to act out on it. But that way has never worked. And it's never been the way of the saints and the mystics. They've always said there's a higher way. Choose that way. Gandhi said, if they kill me, so what? They're just going to have a bag of bones. My soul is eternal. I'll come back and do it again. I'll fight the good fight again. So there's another way. I understand why people get angry and want to. Now, but this says violence is necessary to liberate the poor and eliminate the evil. It just doesn't work. So someone said, if Jesus were alive today, he would be a guerrilla fighter. I dispute that deeply. He came for peace. He died a horrific death for the cause of peaceful living. He overcame death to show us that we don't have to fight. We have to trust, pray, hope, and act in righteousness, not in self-righteousness. Self-righteousness is where anger comes in. It has never worked. It has never worked. Love begets love, and war, violence, hatred begets those things. It's just the way it is. And I grew up, I'm kind of a fighter by nature. And if fighting worked, I would do it. Because I have a lot of that energy in me. And I've had to overcome that energy for the sake of a higher way. And that's a very hard thing to do. But if you vow yourself to being part of the solution, you can't be part of the problem by adding hatred. Humankind, our mind is one thing. And whatever you put out of you, we're creative beings. Whatever you put out goes into the soup of the human mind. So we have to be very careful and conscious and deliberate about what we put out. If we put out hatred, we're going to have more hatred in the soup. If we put out love, compassion, forgiveness, we'll have more of that in the soup. We want the soup to be sweet and to have enough to feed everybody. That's what we want. It's a very challenging practice in today's world to not be angry. How I do that is I pray. I have a vow that says I will support love, and I don't take in a lot of worldly news, because news is a business, it's an industry, and it makes money off of hatred and riling people up and putting people into fear. And so I have sources of information that are neutral and informative without instigating anger and hatred. And then I do the things that I can do. And if everybody's doing their part from a peaceful heart that longs for equality and liberation of people, then we will make it. Now, it's not as expedient as I would like. I have to say, I would like it to speed up. And yes, establish ways of liberating people from who are oppressed because of race, ethnicity, gender, poverty, war, sexual preference, and environment, of course. Jesus said, love one another. He didn't love one another except this group of people. I met a very kind of militant Christian on a plane once, and I was talking to her, and I said, I saw a bumper sticker that said, when Jesus said, love your neighbor, I think he meant don't kill them. He said love your enemies. I think he meant don't kill them. And so loving your enemies, that's a very high calling. Excuse me. So I guess that's what I would say to that, Preston. I'm going to put myself on mute for a minute and get some water. Excuse me. Sorry for the interruption. All right, we'll be rounding out our talk now, and one of the things I would say to come back to the focus of modern mysticism is to say that in today's world we can do this. We can do the practices that bring us into alignment with love. We can focus on being part of the solution and turning away from anger, hatred, and retaliation as a way of being. Jesus did not retaliate. On the cross, he said, "Forgive them, God, they know not what they're doing." All hatred and anger comes out of fear. They don't know what they're doing. If they knew the implications of those things, they would not do them. If they knew that attacking their neighbor or their enemy would only come back to hurt them, they would not do that. So we have to hold that higher eternal perspective. It's not just about our body and our mind and our feelings in this life. It's about our eternal soul. And I'm not talking about hell. I mean, I'm thinking, you look around the world, it kind of looks like we're living in hell. My job is to bring heaven to earth, not to perpetuate hell, perpetuate divisiveness and anger and hatred, but to perpetuate the relief of suffering, alleviation of suffering, the liberation of souls from suffering. Those are the souls of those who are oppressed, and also the oppressor, because the oppressor oppresses out of fear and anger. Hurt people, and that's the way it goes. And until we heal people of their hurt, they won't act differently. So it's hard to love your enemy. That's a very, very high calling. But if you were to know the story of that person, which I know many, many people's stories in my line of work, both as a minister and as a psychologist, and what I know is people do horrible things out of pain. And pain causes us to get angry and do horrible things because the only alternative in most people's lives is despair. And then people who are depressed, they're the ones in despair, and then they can't function. So anger it's more energy than despair. But what we have to have is a mindset of healing. Jesus healed many, many people. The saints healed many, many people. And then when they're healed, that freedom makes them grateful and joyful and wanting others to be liberated. And that's the revolution, or revolution. The word love is in revolution, right? Revolution of love, not of war, not of divisiveness, not of we're right and they're wrong, not of the oppressed against the oppressor, but all of us saying everybody's been hurt. War is ridiculous at this point. Everyone's been hurt. Everyone acts out of pain. If we remember ourselves as something beyond the hurt, then we can have compassion for one another, and we can act as conduits, mystics who know in the spirit that there are forces in the universe that are here for our betterment, for everyone. These forces want heaven on earth, want people to be relieved from suffering, want this to be the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. And so we can join with that movement. It's a little quieter, a little less in the limelight, but no less effective. I mean, Jesus' life as a mystic and a peacemaker and a way shower changed the whole world. Time started over when Jesus died. He gave everybody a reboot and a chance to do it a different way. And that's the reason I follow Jesus, because my experience of him is that I was liberated by his way. And I know it works, and it's effective, and it's fairly efficient way of healing and transforming, and then moving along that way in order to be one of those who is a helper to love and a supporter of love, rather than one that divides and falls into the way of the world, that jungle law of tooth and claw that doesn't work. So I hope that helps you, Preston, to see that. I'd be happy to talk to anybody. Rosemary has my contact information. You're welcome to email me or set up a time to talk with me if you have more questions or things that you want to know about. I am one of those teachers in the world because I've done this practice deeply for many decades now. And so I know the truths of which I speak, and my path has led me there, and I'm happy to help other people to move along the way to liberation of your own spirit, and then to using your spirit to be part of that solution that brings real peace, real justice, and love to the planet, which is the mission of my whole being. So thank you for being here and listening, and I appreciate your questions and your inquiries. And I'll send out the recording of this to those people who weren't able to be here today. It's peace to you. And thank you, Rosemary, for setting this up. I appreciate it.